So today we are talking about So What Chord Voicings. Now that little song I played at the beginning is a sort of shortened mini version or rendition of the song So What by Miles Davis, from which this chord voicing is derived and named. And so those little chords I was playing are in fact known as So What chords. Now let's take a closer look at how this chord is built. So we're going to play a D So What chord voicing. So that's obviously a So What chord beginning on the note D. So obviously you play the root, which is the D, then you go up a perfect fourth, and then another perfect fourth, and then another perfect fourth, and then a major third. So that the chord sounds like this. Now, as you can see, this chord is built out of 3 perfect fourths and then a major third. So unlike the more sort of traditional sounding chords that are just stacked thirds that really sort of want to resolve somewhere and really sort of drive you to that tonic, chords built out of fourths give a much more vague and ambiguous sound, and they don't really feel like they need to resolve anywhere. And that's precisely what gives them their sort of more modern flavour or more modern sound. Now, So What is a modal jazz tune. Now, modal jazz is a completely different beast to sort of your more traditional jazz, and it's got its own sort of underlying ideas and theories, and it's essentially just a completely different type of, or like subgenre of jazz. And I'm not going to be discussing modal jazz in this lesson here. I'm going to leave that for a completely different lesson because there is quite a lot to cover in relation to modal jazz. However, this So What chord voicing can still be analysed and used in a non-modal context and in a non-modal sort of more traditional jazz song or style. And that's precisely what I'm going to be sort of covering or explaining here. Okay, so I've played the So What chord voicing, but now let's have a look at what chord this actually is. Now, because of its ambiguity, like I said earlier, because of its more modern sound and its vague and ambiguous harmony, and the fact that it's built in fourths rather than thirds, it can be a number of different chords sort of at once, or depending on the context. So it can be a D minor 11, it can be a B flat major 13, it can be an E flat major 7 sharp 11, or it can be a G9 sus chord. So this voicing here, the D So What chord voicing, can be all of those chords and probably more, but they're sort of the main ones. Now, by far the most common way to use this So What chord voicing is over a minor 7 chord when the fifth of that chord is in the melody. By that I mean if you're playing a song and you come across a D minor 7 chord with an A, the fifth, in the melody, then you would use this chord voicing. Because the fifth is at the top, it's the melody note, it's the highest note in this chord voicing. However, as I just said, this chord voicing is quite ambiguous and it can be a number of different chords at once, depending on the context. So you can use this chord voicing in a number of different ways. For example, if you've got a 2-5-1 in the key of C major, so you would go D minor 7 to G7 to C major 7, you could do something like this. Play a D So What chord voicing over the D minor 7, then that exact same chord voicing as a G9 sus chord, which is a substitute for a G7 chord, and then up to an E So What chord voicing for your C major 7. So your 2-5-1 suddenly sounds like this. Right? Really ambiguous, really harmonically vague, and really quite modern sounding. But another thing I like to do over that exact same chord progression is to use the D So What chord voicing for your D minor 7. Then for your G7, just move that C down 1 semitone, and you've got yourself a G9. And then you can go up to the E So What chord voicing for your C major 7. So now it sounds like this. Now, to show you an example of how you can use the So What chord voicing in practice, let's take that chord and insert it into a song, and let's take the jazz standard Take the A Train. So if you wanted to, you could play it something like this. Cool, so that was section A of Take the A Train. So essentially all I played was a simple open chord voicing for the first part. Then I got to the D minor 7, and notice that the melody note is the A, which is the fifth of the D minor 7. So I played the D So What chord voicing. Then the next chord is the G7, again with the A in the melody, and so I just moved that C down a semitone, so, and then played the melody. And then we finish on the C major 7, so the first time round I played the B So What chord voicing, which gives a C major 7 sharp 11 sound, and the second time round I played an E So What chord voicing, which gives a C major 13 sound. So that's a good way to go about inserting the So What chord voicing into a chord progression. Find the 2-5-1 and put in that little pattern. Now, another cool thing you can do with So What chord voicings is that because they're a little bit ambiguous, that is, they're built up in fourths rather than thirds, they don't really want to resolve to any particular chord or move in any particular direction. That means you can take that So What chord voicing and sort of move it up and down the piano, and it'll sound quite nice and interesting. So you can either do this diatonically, that is only using the notes from the key that you're in. So for example, this D So What chord voicing is a D minor 7 chord, and D minor 7 is in the key of C major, so you can move this up and down only using notes from the C major scale, that is only the white notes, not the black notes. And so it can sound something like this. Now the danger with this is that not all of your chords are going to be built up out of 3 perfect fourths and 1 major third. Specifically, the distance between the F and the B, which are both notes in the C major scale, is actually an augmented fourth or a tritone rather than a perfect fourth. So that means if you move this So What chord voicing down, that's no longer really the classic So What chord voicing, because you've got that augmented fourth there. So really that gives you a more of a G9 sus sound. Similarly, if you move it up, again, this interval here is a tritone rather than a perfect fourth, and that gives you more of a F major 7 sound. And again, if you go up again, this interval here is not a perfect fourth, it's an augmented fourth, and again that gives you a G7 sus sound. So even though the shape looks like it's a So What chord shape, because it's not built out of 3 perfect fourths and a major third, you do have to be a little bit careful. Now the other way you can move this chord shape around is in parallel motion, that is by keeping the sort of classic So What voicing intervals in shape, that is 3 perfect fourths and a major third. So then when you're moving up, for example, you go up to the E, then when you go up to the F, you have to play something like this to get the perfect fourth there, perfect fourth there, perfect fourth there, and a major third. If you go up to the G, you have to play this to get the perfect fourth interval here. So that's the other way you can sort of move this chord shape around. Now again, this can sound really interesting if you put it into a song, especially a song where the melody sort of moves up or down 1 step at a time. So again, to give you an example, let's take the song Summertime. Now you could play it something like this. first chord of Summertime is an A minor 7, and the melody note is an E, which is the 5th. So this is a perfect opportunity to use this So What chord voicing. Now, the melody also goes up and down one step at a time, which again is a perfect opportunity to sort of move that So What chord voicing up and down either diatonically or in parallel motion to create a bit more of an interesting harmony and sound. And that's exactly what I did. So the first time I played section A of Summertime, I moved this chord voicing up and down diatonically. That is, only using the notes in the A natural minor scale, so no sharps or flats. So the second time round, I moved that same chord voicing up and down in parallel motion, that is keeping that sort of classic So What chord shape. So it sounded something like this. Right? And both of those are perfectly fine things to do, and they just give a slightly different sound and harmony. But you can certainly play around with either of those ideas over any kind of melody that sort of moves step by step. Now, once you've got that down pat, there are a couple other things that you can do to play around with this So What chord voicing. And like any other chord, this one has inversions. So if we play the D So What chord voicing, again that's, say, root position, then we can move the D up to the top and get first inversion, move the G to the top, get second inversion, move the C to the top, get third inversion, and if we move the F up to the top and get fourth inversion, notice that the major third has disappeared and we have a quartal chord voicing, which again is a voicing used a lot in modern jazz and which I will leave for a different video. And then finally, the only other thing I wanted to say is that you can also play around with the intervals in this chord, like we kind of did when we were moving it around diatonically. Like, for example, this interval here is now a tritone rather than a perfect fourth. So you can sort of do the same thing the other way. You can sort of move the left hand, say, one step closer, and that gives you either a D minor 9 or a F major 7 chord. You can move it closer again, and that gives you kind of a B flat major 7 sound. Or if you move it really close, it sounds really dissonant. And I don't know what that chord is, but I'm sure if you sit down with a pen and paper and try and work it out, you'll come up with something. Anyway, they're just sort of different ideas you can employ when thinking about this voicing. So firstly, playing in different inversions and also changing up the intervals between the notes to see what other interesting sounds and chords and essentially voicings you can get. Cool, and so play around with this So What chord voicing, see what interesting sounds you can get, see what songs you can put it into. And as I said, it does give quite an ambiguous and modern sounding chord voicing. But otherwise, yeah, I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Thanks for viewing. See you guys.